written down. Greetings, Earthlings and others. This is Layman Pascal out front so you don't have to be, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Integral Stages perennially popular author series. Now, that's not what this is, but that was the sentence that I first used to introduce our initial discussion with R. Michael Fisher around his book, The Marianne Williamson Political Phenomenon. And today, sort of on the cusp of the American election, we're going to check back in with our resident artistic integral fearologist in a putatively popular new segment that I call Integrative Fearology-ology, where I conversationally map what developmental fearologists think and feel about things. Hi, Michael. Good to see you.
Hi, great. Developmental fearologist. I love it. That's a nice coining.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Currently, maybe you're the only guy in that category, but if we had
Yeah,
1,000 of you, maybe we'd get somewhere.
I'm with you on that. So let's try and spread the meme.
Let's do it. Um, Before we get into the nitty gritty of things, I wanted to
Yeah,
say that I saw your YouTube 6th anniversary video, and I have a couple of questions.
great.
You appear to be doing what I would call partial gray face. Was
Oh,
that a
okay.
was that a beard of shaving cream? Was it some kind of therapeutic facial mask? What was that?
Well, it's great that it created an inquiry, right? That I didn't expect there'd be an inquiry, and a few people did. It's shaving cream. It was just like I'm sitting there putting on my shaving cream because I'm going to do a video that morning, and all of a sudden I go, "That's a great look to start a video." I don't think any YouTuber maybe has started that, so I always like to be original.
I loved it. It was one of my favorite two things about that video. The other thing was this quote you gave from the jazz bassist Ron Carter, who said, if I get this right, creativity is not a property of exceptional people, but an exceptional property of all people. And then I said to myself, who is Ron Carter? And I looked it up. First of all, I asked AI, who's the greatest jazz
Oh,
bassist of all time, and it said Charlie Mingus. And then I checked the top 50 on youdiscovermusic.com, and they said Jaco Pastorius, although some debate about whether he's really just a jazz bassist. But I was wondering, is it just a quote you loved, or is there something about Ron Carter's music that moves you?
yeah. I mean, obviously, you listen to him play that documentary that's linked there on that video. It's a just I think it's just called Ron Carter, the new documentary, relatively. You just to listen to him play. He plays a lot. He's practicing. They show him practicing. They show him talking about how he practices. But it's just there's something about this subtitle that he used for I think one of his albums, looking for the right note. And what he says in the documentary, that's what keeps me going. It's not the score in front of me. It's not the people necessarily I'm playing. It's not even the full sound of everything. He says, but me as a creator, I'm looking for the right note at any moment that is not the note I already know how to play. In a way, doesn't know the sequence. And I think that really speaks to an integral perspective in the creative developmental way. I think that both you and I would understand, and a lot of your viewers, is that is so exciting to me as an artist myself and the work I do, whether it's on fear, whether it's in politics or education. I don't want to have the same discourses over and over. I don't want to be trapped in the chord structure. And that's what I saw in this wonderful jazz bassist and Ron Carter, that he's had a career of 50 years plus and has apparently recorded more than any music with recordings than any other bass player. So that's part of his fame. But the part of the other fame is people don't know what he's going to play. He'll give you'll give him the structures and then he'll play, and then he plays it like, what? Okay, we were not expecting that. So I think that is the magic I would like to see in every conversation as much as possible, even though you can never control that.
I love that, and it's something that's so essential to integrative or meta level thinking, but so often overlooked, is that the leading
Mhm.
edge is not just a set of ideas that are held in a static form by people who identify themselves as being at the leading edge. It's a constantly unfolding ferment. You've got to constantly be finding that next thing that fits in, but is also surprising and is also precise. And then you're like living that leading edge, which is what we have to do, and not merely be the custodians of models of how leading edges operate.
Yeah, and of course, just the new language of meta, right, that has grown in the last 10 years at least, probably a little longer, but it's like when it starts to become its own driver, and then people identify with the driver, and then it's like any club.
Yeah.
It can really deteriorate quickly into the language, right? The constructs of what it does. So if we're really practicing integral and above in some kind of way of consciousness, we have to think that we always ought to be deconstructing our very constructions. And if we're not doing that, right, that's what we used to call good process thinking and practice. But if we're not doing that and we're starting to try to promote, and I was thinking that this morning coming on, and I says, how could Layman and I have a conversation where we're not trying to promote anything? And I thought, that's not easy to do today, especially on this medium when you sit in front of a camera and everybody's got a thing. You're selling a book, you're selling a movement, you're selling this. And so I'm just in my own sense as we prep today for this. If we can think about that, are we at any moment trying to promote something, or are we actually trying to elucidate something? And I'm not saying they're not connected, and they probably always will be inevitably, because representation is part of language, it's part of taking an idea or even experience, right? And then wanting to move it into the communal space. But it's like how you do that. And we're in a self-promoting culture. The selfie, we are doing, in a sense, double selfieing. And we're caught in the doppelgangers of ourselves.
It is a very pernicious kind of a problem because, like you say, this is a double selfie medium. I dressed up Canadian as
Nice. I
far as
did
I thought,
notice
right?
that.
So I'm representing something,
Did
but
notice.
also when I speak, you know, uh, there's ideas I formed 5 seconds ago, or or topics I came up with when I was thinking toward this interview, right? And some of those are viable, some of those are still kind of fresh, but you don't want to get trapped in being the promoter of previous versions of your own thinking.
Yeah. Oh, so good start. Good start. Yeah, so let's just fly. I've got visions here to share. I've got little stories, and I'm sure you will interact with that and so on. So I don't know where we want to start.
Yeah, I know there's some exciting places you want to go with this. I thought a pertinent place to go in the collective mind would be some questions around the U.S. Democratic Party, or the anti-democratic party, as Green Party candidate Jill Stein calls it, and looking at that through some of these lenses, like the fear lens that you use. And I was curious whether like from your point of view, how do you make sense of the thing that's been going on for the last couple of years inside the party to not really allow any rival candidates to Joe Biden, and then the public version of that, which is a kind of popular liberal anxiety that seemed to feel like if they acknowledged any cognitive deficit or any political weakness in their one official choice, that they would somehow lose the election and doom democracy completely. It seemed like a very anxious process, and I wonder what kind of observations you made of that.
Yeah, I think anytime you get to a kind of, let's just call it a muted singularity of formation, whether our identity as the Democratic Party, and ultimately that identity is hooked, as far as I can understand, it's always hooked to the 4-year turnover. So everything that's flowing as experience, as process, as the political realm, thank goodness we have a political realm, gets funneled into a political endeavor, which is that narrowing cone of a goal. I was listening to your last speaker, Nava Israel, on the idea of that constant shifting down to a pointed, powerful cone. And I would say, unfortunately, that is the imaginary trap. And I would say it's a fear imaginary trap because it's focused on coning in a sense with that very directed, we've got to win that election. Who's going to go in the ring? And that's where you get all the sport analogies to me of blue meme or amber consciousness, if we use spiral dynamics ideas. You just get that coning to the body, right? The social body of your organization has to win. So it's always needing to dominate the winning. And so all these movements we've had without going further into details of the Democratic Party at this moment. You can probe me if you want or add. But I just want to say that that movement is really hooked to blue meme as far as I'm concerned. So this is the really first communal structure of development of consciousness in the individual development plus in the overall cultural arc. Again, all kinds of problems with that when you take a postmodern, post-structuralist view. But just to generalize on that theory, and so that blue meme is the foundation of the communal structure. Do you expect the Democratic Party to be operating at green or above or into integral? There's no way they can structurally, I think. And I think that you need to respect that. So that's my little promo thing or theory is why? Because fear is operating in blue, meme, or amber, whatever. It's operating in orange, in that next. It's operating in green. It's operating in yellow. It's operating all the way up the spectrum of consciousness. Wilbur says, and others, pathology's all the way up, all the way down. Okay, so I always go, well, what if I name that? I'm looking for fear-based structuring, coning, pathological coning is another idea, right? This narrowing to the win goal. And then you get people come along who are the pluralists, right? And they say, well, let's just, I've heard Jill Stein even say this in a recent interview. Come on, lefties, let's unite. However, at the same time, I'm hearing total fear. She's saying the anti-Democrats, they are the anti-Democrat. So she wants to participate in the Democratic frame. Well, of course she does. That's why she's leading a party. And she's devoted her life to it. And at the same time, she's saying, but that frame is anti-democratic. Well, Jill Stein, you're not the biggest frame. The biggest frame is blue meme, not green meme. So this is where this amazing existential distress. And it's not uncommon to hear many people, Marianne Williamson included, we are facing an existential threat in the United States with the fascists taking. Well, no, it's we're facing an existential threat with democracy crumbling before our eyes if we ever had it the way we thought we had it, And so what you're just hearing is a lot of crumbling and a lot of terror-based reaction. And I'm going, actually, that's not weird. That actually is not weird. That is expected in, I think, the condition of where we're going, what the planet is having to deal with, and the challenge from the oligarchy and corporatism and so on. Those are a few thoughts about it.
Yeah, this blue mythic membership, team sports orientation toward winning and the anxiety that comes into that. It's very understandable. Anybody who's watched a sporting event understands how people get into that kind of thing. And it's interesting to think that a lot of the machinery of how politics is done is instantiated at that level because that's how you build a movement, a community, a nation spirit of some kind.
It is, yeah.
And then you see these candidates who represent the things that many of us hope for in terms of moving the system forward, and they have a kind of inner conflict around participating in that. I just recently watched an old George Carlin special, and he was talking about Bill Clinton. And he said one of the nice things about Bill Clinton is he said, I'm completely full of shit, and how do you like that? And we all said, yay, because we actually like a level of bullshit. Now, he's using an epithet, right? But what he's calling bullshit is to some degree blue-amber thinking, right? A court of not rationally substantiated stories that mobilize people. And Bill Clinton was good at sort of presenting that he felt okay participating in and manipulating that aspect of the system. And it seems like that's something that you need to do in order to mobilize the culture and win elections. So it's troubling to me. There's not really a question here, but it kind of hurts my heart to see candidates who I wish would do better having this internal friction of not wanting to participate in the system they're trying to participate in. And that gives me some anxiety. And I want them to give me comfort so that I can mobilize.
Yeah. And the reality is they don't mobilize that well. And you kind of, at some level, you kind of go, oh, okay, well, is that because they're actually healthy and all the rest is not? That's one argument.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we're not able to make it. It's so unhealthy out there. But what you hear is this constant victimization, even from Cornell West. Oh my gosh, they just carry it. They carry it. And of course, I watched Marianne Williamson, right, for 6 years as our last talk on your show. She has capability of getting slightly out, and then I just watch it collapse really quick. And so that's a bit of my analysis on when I do my next book on her. It will be about that. That's what I'm watching. I'm watching, I think, things you're very interested in. So you said you were at a retreat, sort of workshop-y kind of thing, and I was curious about the process you had to go through with the group, about its own process of evolution. So I wouldn't mind you actually using that analogy right now. I think it's relevant.
Yeah, it's hard to know how transferable the lessons are from a space like that to sort of more general popular phenomenon because it's a very curated space in a way,
Hmm.
right? You're going to draw people in, you're going to try to support everything they need, you're going to give them a really puzzling question to work on together, but you're expecting them to come in with a great deal of cognitive sophistication, process-oriented self-critique, and heart openness so that they can just jump right into this difficult conversation.
So you're
And what I
talking
found was,
example
yeah,
by would it's really a think tank quote kind of idea,
yeah,
but it's a
yeah.
deeper type of think tank. And do you want to say what the topic was?
So we were exploring this. I mean, we called it the Integral UAP Task Force, but it was really about the broader question of how anomalous entities of various kinds are handled in sense making. Because it's one of the things that outside of some vague notion of appreciating the subtle quiet zone, it's not really in Wilbur's models very much. There's people like Sean Hargens have been working for a while now to build up better maps of this stuff, but there are some really open questions about, are we looking at a phenomenon that disregards the quadrant boundaries on on a Wilbur map or things like that? Or how do we look at different kind of levels of sense making around this? Or how do we do? I mean, there's a lot of questions. It's not even clear what the topic is when you say we're going to talk about archetypes and thought forms, and this person saw an elf, and another guy claims the government has some weird tech in a bunker. Do those actually even belong in the same category? So there's a lot of basic ontological, epistemological, and philosophical organizing that has to be done to make any sense of this. And it has to be done at a very high level. So you need people to be able to drop in and work on it really fast. So that kind of temporary think tank setup, I think, worked
Temporary,
really
yeah.
well for that. And what I noticed was, I mean, I tend to do this when I set events up. I set it up as if I had to do it all, then I could do it all. And then if it starts to do something on its own, then I can draw back and not do it. So I had prompts and structures, but
Mm.
basically, as people began to show up, the conversation just starts, and you just watch it move through all the different sets of considerations with increasing nuance. And so my job then is to draw back the structure and just keep the physical aspects of things going and make sure they get to the fire pit or have dinner or things like that. But that's my sense of how it can be done. And going forward, there are ways to do that facing many of the difficult sense making challenges the species is facing. But if you set it up right, it should kind of run by itself so that you can draw back and don't have to keep everybody on task like it was a conference or a seminar, because conferences and seminars are kind of demonstrating that they can't quite grapple with the big problems we're
Yeah.
facing collectively.
Yeah. So, we're talking about self-organization systems, right? And all that excitement that has come. And it's given a lot of us, I would say, a kind of hope that systems actually have intelligence to self-organize. And then, of course, then you get kind of critics from various directions about cyberspace and machine world that, well, they actually are controlling the way you self-organize. Like they have systems that are structured to actually impact your self-organization capabilities of any system. And so all of a sudden you sort of go, oh, well, we're kind of, there's no, not what I'm trying to get to is there's no autonomous free self-organizing system in
Mm-hmm.
today's digital machine built culture,
Yeah.
technoculture.
No, I agree, and I think there's a part of that that's always been the case. There's part of like the kinds of dynamics that like maybe Marx would have looked at, or then
Mhm,
Freud would have looked at, your
mhm.
subconscious and sociological mechanisms that tilt the playing field of our self-perception before we even engage.
Yep.
But now there's an entire additional set of those things, which comes from automated preference tweaking systems that are getting closer and closer. I was writing about this the other day. Like you used to have to go out into the town square to get the surface level of gossip, and then you could get it in a newspaper and bring it home, and now it's beamed into your pocket, into your children's bedrooms, and now there's nodes that the algorithm can go right into your brain now. And it can go into your brain 1,000 times faster than your brain is otherwise
Yeah.
processing information. So there's an extreme asymmetry there in terms of how well we can know what we're actually trying to do or what our values and perspectives are. So this problem we used to talk about around like the hidden ideological element
Right. Right.
in politics and values, that's an even more profound problem now than it was when people are talking about it in the 60s.
Yep. Yep. And then you bring in conversations. Some of the people I've talked to around mass hypnosis, techniques of subliminalization that are going on. Never mind our own unconscious, which we don't really supposedly know, or at least a lot of it. So anyway, I guess in the big picture, it is. I'm getting a sense of what you're interested in, and some of the people that you are around. And I haven't, kept up with those models of new advances at the edges and so on. But you can hear I started my conversation with wanting to go back to Blue Meme, like wanting to go back to the mythic organizing structure. Now, I'm not, that could be dangerous and that could be another part of thinking, right? And of course, a lot of people critique Wilbur for these very, hierarchical structures and so on. But there's, when I look at and feel about, and there's some data. I mean, if you think about what happened in South Africa with the switch of government from the British rule to Nelson Mandela and that move, and how were they going to make that transition without it being absolutely disastrous, so called, to try to end apartheid structurally? That's when spiral dynamics, Don Beck and his spiral dynamic theory was advising those people to make that transition, do it at the soccer matches where they're playing international games, and we'll bring stuff in to reconnect the collective so that we can make really tough green pluralistic changes to a society that are going to take decades to really even get to an equality of pluralism. And I keep thinking that was a pretty empirical study. Now, maybe somebody's taken that apart, but the bits of I've studied, I went, no, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. And so I'm Canadian politics. I go, I just don't get the feel that in American politics, and you feel it today with Kamala Harris coming in. It's hard not to feel the wave of this energy and what it builds. And I'm going, that's Blue Mean. That is not anything I know of in the higher structures that can do that, that can collect that way. Again, all the pathologies of that are twists and turns and manipulations. But I think that's the kind of core of I'm trying to get at is, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater is kind of the common phrase. So anyway, just a couple thoughts there.
I think this is one of the things that developmental models really should suggest to us, which is, I mean, it has to be stacked up. You can't come in at green and you go, oh, we're going to generate a culture spirit from green. That's not the layer culture spirit is enacted at.
Yeah,
It's a bit like, I mean, I guess what I try to do is make space for the conversations that are at the
yeah,
edges of the integral discourse.
sure.
One of those conversations is around financing, right? And one of the things around financing is, are we trying to sort of sell and profit from a really high level cultural idea, or could we do something more like what the monasteries did, where like here's a physical structure and we're going to sell beer and honey and we're going to use the proceeds to make things free for the monks so we can distribute these idea sets to the world. But that's an example of we're coming at the level too high. for actually setting up the phenomenon. I see a similar thing in politics. You
Yeah.
do have to mobilize blue amber. It has to be mythic in order to get nation spirit of some kind.
And Marianne Williamson was, you know, you could watch her 6 years. This is a dedicated, you're not going to see this like a dedicated person, leader, and definitely an alpha female and so on. She's an entrepreneur. She knows how to work systems. She's got some big contacts, and she figured I can stand up to Donald Trump. I can stand up to this movement toward fascism. And she had all of it down, great sort of policies for the most part, very progressive, but she couldn't attract the left. She couldn't attract progressives generally. I mean, from the left, especially the more secular left and so on. But that's important. And I think she didn't really, she tried, she had a little bit of language for it, but it just wouldn't work. And of course, there's a lot of reasons. But I think that's what I watched is she just, I think I said it in your last video. I says, Marianne Williamson, I have any advice for you is go reread Wilbur, go read Spiral Dynamics, just because she knows of that model. I know she knows. But she's forgot it, and she's off on her entrepreneurial stream. And I can be the great leader, and I will put me in there for 4 years, and I'll make all these changes, and then we can bring a younger. See, you can just hear there's like, and there was an African American woman who interviewed her way back a couple of years ago, well, maybe 2 years ago, as she was still running, and this woman said to her, and she was a very experienced organizer in the left, the black radical left in America. And she said after the interview, she just said to the audience, it was really cute. She says, yeah, when I finished the interview with Marianne, I says, yeah, she's very smart. And yeah, really a lovely person. She says, but she has no idea how to organize. That she said that right blank in video.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Marianne ever watched that video, but that is what I saw over and over. And that's what I don't want to be. I don't want to be one of those talking heads, nor do I want that from you or others if we can be conscious of it, where we are into that promoting,
Yeah.
and not figuring out organizing has been well worked out for a lot of decades, if not centuries. And the real political activist ground level, as you say, even at that economic level as well. And this could be in spiritual community, it could be in secular. There are structures and things you have to really pay attention to with a lot of care. And so I think that's the simple example would be Marianne Williamson. I would ask you, you wrote a book in 1997 called Healing the Soul of America. 1997, a lot of years ago. And it was all about, her vision for a new America, healing the soul of America. I mean, just to put that in a title is like, wow, like what kind of leader does that? Well, we're talking a pretty high level leader. And so, but then when you look at the structure of what she did since then, she was never able to organize groups of study groups. And every really powerful movement I know of, and I'm not a historian expert here, they start with adult education groups forming in circles. And you build that network and each educating each other, meeting at times to collect, then go off, do your thing. Probably the Green Party sort of trying to do that, but the Green Party is still coming with such an agenda that it's allergic. It's allergic to society. And I get it. I was allergic to society for years as a green person, as an environmentalist, as an ecologist. And now I see that all, and that's kind of where I come to it, says, well, that's because it's fear-based structure. We haven't got out of the fear-based structure. And if you go back to just really basic integral theory from certainly Don Beck to Ken Wilber to guys losing my mind who started Spiral Dynamics. Do you remember his name? The psychologist.
Claire Graves.
Thank you. Yeah.
Or Don Beck. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Claire Graves at the core, and in his work and all the rest, Don Beck sort of took it, Wilbur's took it, is they basically said the shift from that first tier of those 5 memes, 6 memes to get to that second tier at all is one of the things Graves said. He says people are not fear-based. In other words, less than 50% of their motivation is fear-based. So more than 50%, you're going to hang down in those memes, up the green meme. And that's green meme doesn't like to think that way. It thinks we're the top. We're not. We're courageous. We're like, and then of course they use the language existential threat, existential threat. If he gets in, if this happens, the world's going to burn apart, because we're not acting on climate. And so then you get to the concept of fear mongering, which is another critique. So we could have a Marxist critique, we can have all kinds of critiques, socialist critique. And I think what I'm just pulling in, we need to have a fearological critique.
We're talking about blue, amber, and green a lot. We're not mentioning orange very much. And one of the places I see orange showing up here is in the uh, tactical, corporate-friendly control structures within the parties, right? And they have a certain anxiety, it seems, about maintaining the system of structure and business and control that's already been set up. And you can imagine, it's not hard to imagine a scenario in which kind of bottom up organizing ethos and energy processes that support something that's roughly liberal progressive or Democrat Party, that bubbles up and becomes a lot of energy. And the party structure says, no, we don't want that. We'd, in fact, rather maybe lose the election than have a candidate in place who isn't aligned with the values of the party control structure.
Orange. Is that
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, where they're not really, they might acknowledge even that there's a more sophisticated, more sensitive layer, but they're not interested in that. They're interested in just functionally maintaining a system that's profitable to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you got to win. And
Hmm.
profit is win. No profit, lose.
Yeah.
You can just hear the incredible imaginary that we've got that's running so hard. And I feel compassion for that. I feel compassion for people who are putting their life out there, putting their life on the line, putting their careers on the line. I don't think everybody's just gobbling up goods, and greedy. That's the easy scenario of critique. I think there are a lot of people who think they're actually trying to make the world better. And it's sad. It's sad that they're caught in that imaginary too. And I just don't think I've seen the politician or the political leader or even could be a political leader. I don't hear them talking about that kind of reflectivity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
something is missing just in there. So you and I or whoever wants to join a conversation like this, I see this as a preparatory. This is a part of, it's not the only, it's a part of the preparatory conversation space for a young person or even an older person listening and going, I really want to run in Canadian politics, whatever level, right? Just to be local, right up to the federal. And to actually go, oh, well, these guys, they're talking about I could run, but I could actually find a new freeway or a parallel freeway. And I think the Indigenous peoples of this land in Canada, they made it very clear we don't want to be part of your world. We're going to sign off all the blood and shed and all the horrors, but we're going to sign off and we're going to go this way, and where you go that way, and we're going to go like that in parallel. So, what I'm looking for is an imaginary in Canada that has the energy of American culture. Oh, we so could use that. That is a powerful energy. And I see it with the Kamala Harris turn. And I'm not saying it's all beautiful and harmony. That's not the point. It's just, wow, I can't get that arising in Canada unless it's the truckers blocking a highway in Ottawa or something. Then you'll get quite a bit, but it's so thin. It's just so thin about issue, right? It's not actually about this young person listening today or another person listening going, I want to run politically, but I want a freeway that's different. Man, they're not going to do it if they see that freeway. Oh, Greens tried that, NDP tried that, or somebody tried that in Independent, or Jordan Peterson. He said, "Fuck the political system. I'm just going to go and start my own university. I'm going to, recalibrate the definition of what it means to be a leader, and I'm going to lead and make my cadre." And so now we have the political corporate leaders running the country. And so Jordan Peterson's on my list as one who is just a perfect symbol of he was looking for a different highway. He could have gone conservative. and ran that way through the ranks. He comes out of Alberta, right? Radical Alberta has always been anti-separatist, blah, blah, blah. I know, he just like he's comes out of a place 200 miles away from where I grew up. I know Northern Alberta and that kind of mentality where he comes out of in the community. But look what he's done. So I think there's a really interesting model there to analyze without, poo-pooing Jordan Peterson. But when he comes out and he says, I just started, I just want to give you the phrase from this recent talk with his daughter. Of course, she's the CEO of his university. Um, but he comes out with the title, The Re-Education of Jordan B. Peterson, Coming to the Airwaves Soon. He's totally utilizing everything of the college, Ontario College, who's, now, and the Supreme Court has rejected his, counter case and basically said, no, you cannot call yourself a psychologist in this country. And you need to be re-educated. And then Peterson says in the end, he says, I'm starting to sort of have a morbid curiosity about that training. I think I'll do it. He didn't say that, but you can see it doesn't matter. And that's what Trump does. It doesn't matter what hits, I will utilize that because I have the structures and I have the popularity. So again, here's where we got to think populist. And what is the history of organizing populism? And how can we then have that integrally informed, if we were to just use that language, metally informed? I think we could attract new political leaders in this country.
I think we definitely could. And I think there's been a pattern of um, liberal progressives throwing away the opportunities to gather in that energy, right? Like Jordan Peterson is an example of one of many people who are prominent culturally, prominent in online spaces, who didn't start out really aligned with a lot of reactionary conservatives, but they've either had to decide to make that alignment or decide to try their own thing because they've been pushed out of whatever the dominant sensitized neoliberal administrative consensus is, or however we want to phrase that. That they're at an edge, and instead of saying, "Oh, that's a really interesting spot to be. We want to harness edge energy," we
Yeah.
say, "No, you have to decide which side you're on," and they don't join, so they get pushed farther to the other side, and then the other side welcomes them with open arms. But there's a tremendous resource of people there that if they were absorbed, they would be the cultural batteries for some new kind of politics if they had the right kind of cognitive, ethical, and emotional framing to support that.
Yeah. And the left, I'm just going to say, the left is to me not that inviting. It's inviting still in very old imaginaries of critical theory, of critical philosophy, very European and so on and so on. I'm not saying those are bad. I'm just saying they need a lot of upscale.
You
Go ahead.
mentioned we're in a moment of Kamala Harris energy. And that's an interesting moment to be in because for some time she's been either ignored or disliked by most people, and now she's a shining champion. Support came out of the woodwork. Democrats feel like they can smile again. Republicans are floundering in their attacks. There's a new spirit, but the question about why and what that spirit means is interesting to me because you could say, well, this is just because that Biden thing got taken care of and we're breathing a sigh of relief. It's just that something happened.
Sure.
Or you could
Absolutely.
say that maybe Kamala or Kamala's team understands how to create and resonate with this energy. Or you could say it's just the temporary wave of the cultural zeitgeist she happens to be riding, but it might change in a week or roll and break, right? It could just be a coincidence. So how do you read this moment of Kamala energy?
Well, I think it's all of those things. It could be for sure. Probably all are partially playing into the factoring of this vector of enthusiasm. I mean, that's just a really interesting, that word just popped out of me. And I says, why did I say enthusiasm instead of something else? And I go, well, don't poo-poo enthusiasm. And immediately starting to attack it. I mean, that is to me the problem of the critical mind, the analytical critical mind operating from imaginaries of, yeah, but I really know which is the right way to go. my way. Okay, so I align with the Greens or I align with Cornwall West or JFK or whatever. But again, it's like, yeah, you're so aligned still. See, you people, you're not even paying attention to experience and collective experience. And that's where I think you have to have compassion. I mean, that is fearlessness when you are up in that level of capability of your own existential despair and terror. The world's going to fall apart. We're going to burn all the fear mongering that you yourself are actually participating in, even if you think you're not. Even if Marianne Williams thinks I'm doing politics of love, I'm bringing politics of love. But when you analyze it deeply, as I've done for 6 years, oh, it's so much fear driven. And even in her latest video, when she's not even running anymore, Donald Trump is, a fascist. She's still saying that stuff. And I'm just going, don't kill the enthusiasm of Kamala Harris, but it's not about Kamala Harris. So that's one thing I do. Stick to watching, I think, from when you get outside of a fear-based motivation. So that's what we're talking about in a way. That's your my interest, is to keep moving the consciousness forward while respecting all those consciousness structures and other ways of organizing. But ultimately, if my motivational emotive, because when we talk about enthusiasm, you're talking about emotions, affect. Well, politics is now a politics of affect. So many scholars have arced out that change. They call it the affective turn in philosophy, in culture. And we've gone through a lot of turns in philosophy and culture, right? The postmodern turn, the cultural turn, linguistic turn. And when you start getting to the affective turn, in some ways I say, okay, turn it over to the women. As part of me says, turn it over to the women, because, and some of the best affective politics analysis are from women scholars there, and some other women of color, and so on. I'm thinking Sarah Ahmed is marvelous in that regard. But regardless of that, that is, I think, part of what we're going through and why Kamala is showing up in the moment of existential crisis in the United States. Not that it hasn't been there before in its elections, and it always hypes those extremes, but it probably is unique. The Donald Trump phenomenon is pretty unique. I don't know, you can't say we have a model of that too clearly at all. So we are in those new creative zones. So getting back to the quote on creativity, let's give space. Let's give compassionate space for the creativity of all the bumping that's going on. See, I'm not focusing on the player. I'm focusing on how the player bumps with other players and what the game is doing. The great Wayne Gretzky, right? You're such an amazing player. He says, it's the team. It's the team. He always put it off himself. It's the team. And that is coming back to the blue meme sensibility, not the self-promoting green. Even green is a communal type of meme. It's still so caught in the orange self-promoting, winning formula. And I think the whole idea, if I could say anything about a more less fear-based driving, to watch the cat. So I'm just suggesting watching the Kamala phenomenon of excitement and actually sitting in the affect of that. I, as a Canadian, and my fellow Canadians, we can learn a lot from that without having to get into winning choice making. So let's come to sense making. And sense making, you pay attention to your senses before meaning. They're totally connected. But I think that's what's really hard when we become meaning making, and then we build that off a self identity of meaning making, and it becomes so important in our political identities, right? To the fine tune, I am of this political identity structure and all the privileging. So there's something that needs to move, and that's where I was sort of saying, in affective politics, we have to is turn it over to the women now. And I say women, I don't mean that as just women with women bodies, so called. And males can participate in womanness, in mothering a culture. So I think that's the exciting news. And I just watching a website the other day, and there's now a movement for the last year they've been building around the world, and it's called um, Founding Mothers. And it's their contradiction to founding fathers being the typical political core of many nations today, most. And they're starting an organization called Founding Mothers and mobilizing collective gathering. And you're welcome as a male or male identified or in between or whatever you might call yourself. It is about the mothering. And the enthusiasm is what? It's about birth. The birth of America, the rebirth. See, we've gone through a long therapeutic tragedy, haven't we? When you think of it, North American culture, just even American culture, it's gone through such a deep, dark place. This is like therapy, right? You go into a deep, dark place. And at some point, there's an emerging light. And we're looking for it. The psyche needs it. And we don't need to call it enlightenment that we're searching for. And this is to me the woman and feminist perspective, because I'm very steeped in that perspective. I'm a radical feminist myself, is that the light is the rebirth. See, it's not the enlightenment. And that's where the male phobia, rising inflated can happen. Not that it's wrong or bad, it's just it loses connection to the birthing. So pay attention to the birthing, affective culture, affective politics. I think we all have a new vocabulary in there. There's going to be some tweaking in there that can be more creative and generative. So I'm just playing off today. Let's be enthused.
I like that. The next event that I'm organizing is the
Mm,
Metamodern Spirituality Lab in Vermont. We do two a year, but the next one is goddess themed because the previous one was God themed, right? So then there's a discussion going on around, well, what do we mean by that?
mm,
Right? Obviously, it has something to do with women, but it's not limited to that. It's a set of qualities, like a network of qualities that have something to do with fertility and generativity, but also with mythos, also with right
yeah.
brain, also with affect and emotionality, all those sorts of things, which I think are essential to generating the forms and the energy that create. I want the mythic energy in the population. It has a special role that it's learned to do anciently in that amber blue system. And I
So you,
love that you brought in enthusiasm because what I immediately felt in my heart was the anxiety of the people who see enthusiasm itself as a defect. I remember when Obama was running, hearing people on TV say that it was dangerous that he was inspiring, right? And you can imagine that, like um, people who can't touch the affect themselves view it as inherently. I remember them saying that thing about Bernie as well. They say it about Trump. The fact that he's generating enthusiasm is a mark against him because we need sober, reasonable system controllers. And we do need sober, reasonable system
mhm.
controllers, but the energy to make anything happen comes from allowing yourself to be emotionally moved by the energy of what's going on somehow.
Yeah, yeah, nicely said, nicely said. And the best spirit of social and entrepreneurialism, and even the best spirit of entrepreneurialism, hard to untangle from capitalism. But that just because you're an entrepreneur doesn't mean you're a hardcore capitalist. I'm one of them. I'm been an entrepreneur for over 40 years. And I'm not a hardcore capitalist at all. I like it. But I also know there's a structuring there that if I'm going to be an entrepreneur, it's not all about my freedom. It's about I have to earn a living. I have to figure out how to connect with the networks. And I think the good part of the quadrant model at least says don't just go flying up in the upper quadrants, the individual quadrants. It's got to be moving and circulating through those. And to me, I always went, I rely on that. That to me is very wise. And I don't think that's Wilbur. I think that's the cosmos, how it knows itself.
Yeah, a thing that's coming up for me is around, one kind of scenario is that you find the right perfect leader, somebody
Yeah.
who has an instinctive ability to organize a movement, organize a team, make good decisions, and somehow also intuitively knows how to mobilize the mythic power of populations.
That's not
But
me. I just want to
that's
state
not
that's
you.
not
No,
me.
I think we're the number of people who fit in that category is going to be very small. But there's another possibility as well, which is a leader who just knows how to be the connective node between a network of people who know how to do that. Like George Clooney's article seemed to precipitate Biden stepping down. And Taylor Swift fans are in play around Kamala to some degree, right? And so you can think not just celebrities, but there's other leaders and there's scientists and there's famous people of various kinds. There might be people who are
Yeah,
uniquely gifted at mobilizing this energy. You don't have to figure out how to do it all yourself. You just have to get aligned with some of those people and let them go to work.
yeah, yeah. Well said for sure. That I've always thought that way. I see myself as a, often we'd be called like a thought leader or something like that. Not we're not trying to be the leader. And that's why you could hear when I introed some of the prep for this talk you and I are having that I really want this to be a talk for people who are listening that I think I may want to run in politics. I don't care if you're 12 years old and thinking that. Good. What I don't see in this country, I'm going to just really generalizing horribly, as a Canadian myself, at 70 plus years old, I don't think there would be any enthusiasm in that family, in that school teacher, in that daycare worker, wherever, where the child said, I want to be like that leader. It might be slightly in the ideal fantasy. Oh, that person wants to reach their potential. But the actual energy, structurally, energetically lifting, I don't think Canadians have that for our political leaders. And that's part of why I always try to tweak apart for people when I give talks. Politics and the political sphere are not the same. That is a conflation. It's a horrible
Yeah, yeah.
conflation of epistemological accounting that is very reductive and divisive.
There's uh, there's an interesting aspect to transdisciplinarity, which is how domains influence other domains, right? Because
Yeah.
one approach to transdisciplinarity is let's just have everybody in their non-overlapping magisteria. They, stay on your own mat and we'll all work as a team. Okay, that's one. But there's some other dynamic phenomenon that occurs when something spills over its category into other categories. And my feeling about politics has always been that no real politics is going on unless what's happening is of interest to people who are not interested in politics, right? You can get the people who are interested in politics to be interested in, and some degree everybody else hates those people. They don't want to go to those meetings. So what can you do that's of it's only really a vibrant living politics if it's of interest to people who are not interested in politics. I think that's broadly true in transdisciplinary. Like it's good science if it's interesting to non-scientists. Like everybody was interested in that Einstein thing, even though they didn't understand it. That kind of epistemological leakage tells us something. Um, yeah, I'm hoping for. I mean, in order to move people's hearts, in order to create nationhood and not just governance, it has to be something that stimulates people. And most people don't care about the things that are of concern to people who want to be part of administrative political boards and campaigns.
Yeah, it's kind of the 80-20 rule, right? 20% of the population rules 80% of the organization. We know that can be a problem. But we also have the other phenomena of, 99% of the people at a scene of an accident stand around in awe, and 1% actually knows how to
Yeah.
act and do something. Not just phoning 9/11. They actually can go way beyond that creatively and thoughtfully and sometimes just unconsciously. And so if we are in an emergency kind of state, and I don't mind people, declaring that, but I only, if you say we're in an emergency state, I want to see when the person delivers that, they have a little delight on their face. Joyful, natural delight, not just a natural, we're in an emergency state. And you feel the openness, right? You feel the affective there, affective showing not as emotional outbursts, and that's the wrestling match, and that's the fans of Blue Meme at its extreme, but it actually has a reach of, whoa, you just created space for me to enter the emergency state with you, with us. And then it's not even just about us. I want to actually get where we can go from the I perspective to the we perspective to the it perspective, just using that analogy of integral. The it perspective says it's not even about the we and the I. It's like we actually are interested in the emergency state. Why would a universe practice an emergency state? What an interesting way to frame. So emergency state is not just human centric. And then some people say, oh, well, the universe isn't like that, and I go, yeah, well, there's a lot of arguments that the universe actually does have affect or other aspects. So you get into really interesting ontological issues, don't you? About center of agency and affect and enthusiasm. And I'm just saying, let the cosmos be in emergency here, at least in this corner of the universe. But a corner of the universe is connected to the entire universe. So in some sense, the entire universe cares about what's happening in its corners because it's a living system, as far as we know, if you hear. And so you could just go on and on with that it perspective being so important to bring into the political sphere, right? So I, yes, we, yes, kind of more obvious, but I think we were still way behind in having an imaginary at the it perspective um, for the political sphere. And that would be a really lovely integral kind of pillars, at least a beginning. I think.
I love this idea of being, I don't know, almost playfully curious about how emergency states are enacted at different scales of reality. I thought about, the it perspective on the nervous system as we want to see that this nervous system is functioning, that it's a resilient nervous system. So we want to see little signs on your face and in your eyes that suggest your machinery is good enough to handle an emergency condition rather than something that's just going to break or flatline or go dogmatic under those stresses. I also thought about the element of religion in politics. There's a lot of critiques that when a people loses contact with their legacy religion, then they transfer their religious instincts to political identity and political battles, and that this is problematic. But on the other hand, you could say there is something naturally sacred about mobilizing people, mobilizing community, eliciting the wisdom of the heart of many into collective decisions that operate at scales that are higher than us. And it may be that we need a sacred orientation toward the polis in order to have a real politics, and that something about religion when it's working is this sense that there's a surrender or a higher power or a confidence outside of the concerns of the situation. So you can say, like, okay, maybe this is catastrophic, but I imagine something that gives my heart a feeling that it's guaranteed outside of the catastrophe. So then I can approach the catastrophe in a more relaxed, more benign, more flexible manner. Um,
I
yeah,
would
there's
I
not
would
really a
stop.
question in there, but it's an interesting conjunction of things.
Yeah, just two things in your language, and I know you're just riffing, so this is not a critique. It's really just a noticing while you riff. Of at one point, I hope you started, and then you went into that sequence, and then it's like with guaranteed. And so the fearologist in me, I click on
Yeah,
those words. I just like have
yeah,
a lens for those words because not to say they're not useful entirely, but they have been hooked.
yeah.
Capitalism does both of those. Religions does both of that. And I'm not talking about the best side of religion. I'm not talking about the best side of economic structures for operating huge systems. So the hook is what that will pull you probably into a fear-based structuring and imaginary
Mhm.
hope and guarantee. Or, the other word is promise.
Yeah. I think there's a number of, I mean, thinking about language that might be recognizable to people, a little bit different than thinking about language that would be meaningful to me. When I say something like real religion, I mean there's an open operative mode that encounters its own excess, rather than what I think a lot of people think of themselves as being religious, especially because they've locked themselves down in certain ways, and that lockdown is dependent upon the fantasy of something that secures them against anxiety. I actually run into this in a lot of kind of my quasi theological discussions with people because I promote this idea of the metaphysics of adjacency to come back to promotion. But there's something about uncertainty, there's something about not quiteness that seems to me like baked into the heart of the ontology of reality. And I run into so many people who want to say, well, what we actually have to say, value is implicit. Right? We have to say that this system is consciousness. And I'm like, I don't disagree with you, but we don't have to say that. It actually could be fine for us not to know, or it could be fine if it turns out to be that or not that. Right? There's an opening of the heart space beyond the anxiety, and I think not just as a practical move. I would like to see that baked right into the ontology of reality that we
Yeah.
at some level you fundamentally can't know. And that's the thing to be okay with. Not getting away from that to a thing you can fundamentally know.
And it's hard to, I can't imagine a definition of the sacred anywhere in the human, all of human history. And so you're kind of inflated in my perception here. I can't think of a definition of the sacred anywhere in human history that doesn't have exactly what you're calling for baked into the ontological, epistemological, axiological value spacing that we live, the world space, the world view of a people's that does not have mystery. Mystery is you probably don't. So get that clear and then start to participate in the world that you live in rather than trying to get your container philosophically, spiritually, theologically, psychologically to try to fit the world to your container. Right? It's saying, yes, you have a container. That's the sacred to me. You have a container. And at the same time, that if you don't get that first principle of just exactly what you articulated, whatever words you might want to use for it, it was always there is something that you will never know because you are not the mystery in its completeness. Oh yeah, but I am one with the mystery. Okay, that's fine. But epistemologically, that doesn't mean you've answered epistemological and ontological questions, or especially epistemological, which is really the grit of how do we know what we know, right? Because that's where the existential angst of not knowing, right? The insecurity. And so Alan Watts writes a great book in 1972. I always keep going back to it once in a while. The Wisdom of Insecurity for an Age of Anxiety is his subtitle. These kinds of things are like, they do not go away. And you're probing and I'm probing as well with the fearlessness concept. So again, I'm just coming with another vector to add to this. Fearlessness, you can hear already it's saying, take fear, be with it, keep it in the language, and just keep adding on to it. Fearlessnessing. How do I live a world of fearlessnessing? What does that mean? It says, accept all the fear, accept that you participate in creating fear. You might be fear mongering yourself right in this moment, right? Even using the word fear, you might be fear mongering. That freaks people out. They don't want to hear the word fear. They want to hear the word love and light. So you've got, really big conditions there. But the word fearlessnessizing, I think, has a lot of capacity for traveling the path of insecurity, traveling the path of darkness. We've now got the initiation of, the pilgrim, that is part of the sacred journey. And that's, we've got a society where people are not on those paths. They have no idea those initiation processes in the sacred, right? Where you learn that connection between the self, the me, the mine, in relation to the we, and in relationship to the it perspective.
Like these hand moves where you did an interlaced, first a kind of cradle, but then a kind of journey, but the journey of the interlocked fingers. It's lovely to see.
Nice. Spontaneous. The body knows.
There's a cluster of things. I mean, we just mentioned wisdom and insecurity, and earlier you mentioned awe, and there's something around that, but also confusion and astonishment and the way that all works. I have a little bit of hypnotherapy training, so confusion is a standard mode of trance induction. And the other day I saw a news article, and it had a little clip on Biden and a little clip on Trump and a little clip on RFK Jr. And the Biden clip was him saying, he didn't think there would be a peaceful transfer of power if Trump won. Then he changed it and said if Trump lost. And so he's now said two exactly opposite things. And you're like, what? And then Trump was raving about something, and you go, what? And then RFK Jr. was admitting that some dead bear cub 12 years ago
Yeah.
was something he left. And you're just like, what? And so each one of them is preposterous and astonishing. And
Right.
it seems like that's something that can be liberating, or it can be a way of kind of controlling people by, you know, confusion trance induction is an opportunity to give people a new pattern because they grasp for something in the moment of their confusion.
For sure.
But it
For sure.
seems like there's a more fear-based attempt to um, you can use confusion to control people because their anxiety wants to escape the confusion, but you can also help people learn to be with the confusion and the astonishment in a less fear based, more fantastical manner. And when you do that, I think you start to see possibilities for the co creation of collective spirit through awe and wonder, and that a
Yeah.
lot of the great politicians are able to make people astonished. And a lot of other good politicians, maybe even people who would be able to enact excellent policies, don't astonish people. You're never hearing anything crazy about them,
Yeah.
and that bothers me.
Yeah. Walls would probably be an example of, right, of the new VP that Kamala's picking, so called. Yeah. I mean, I'm just going to give you a really concrete example of how I think about what you're saying. I think it's fairly similar. Fairly similar. And so I work at a daycare, volunteer once a week. That just keeps me grounded with the world at the beginning, more or less, and it helps me as an integralist thinker, as a visionary type thinker, to keep coming back to. And I just want to be in the field of childcare. Not that I totally support daycares or anything like that, but the reality is there are children who get dropped off and show up. Okay, now we have 40 children, 3 to 5 year olds, going and living their world, and they're going to be there for 7 hours a day. It's like, I love that. Be a philosopher, be a theorist, be a whatever, psychologist, educator. Now drop yourself into that field. And you talk about the field of chaos, confusion at some level, but you can see the play, there's play and order going on. But then it's also just like breaking the play because we don't force a lot of structures. It's called play-based education. So I'm talking about building a society at this really early level. You know, we can influence educational systems. Political policy can influence these systems. I'm not completely hopeless around that, even though there's so much. But education is like politics. If I was to look at what education is, I'd constantly want to criticize it and break it down. It's not even education. It's anti-education in the ideas. So moving away from there, I allow myself to go into the field. And what I have try to teach the teachers is I says, take children to the edges. Put it in your planning. And this is not not dogmatic. I just suggest to them, put it in your planning that you're going to take the children to an edge and you're going to dwell at the edge before you cross it. And this would be as simple as when they go out for 1 year walks, or you go out even to the lunchroom because you're going to move from the playground to now have to organize to go to the toilets and go to the lunch, wash your hands. Every time you cross a threshold, and you're not going to do it all the time, every once in a while you stop and you sit down at the edge. You got your other care workers watching the group, trying to keep them roughly together, gathering cats. And the lead who's moving in that direction, you sit down at the edge. You don't cross that edge without thought. And the moment you come to an edge, you really are just letting the children know and giving them space to integrate a change. And they're big changes for a little mind. that's still playing out there and imagining and in fantasy, and then you're trying to force them to go wash their hands. That creates a lot of screaming, and it does. And so teachers are then frustrated with the screaming. Well, let's it's not it's more that awareness of crossing edges, and that to me is what I think a good political leader could do on many levels, right? From the very metaphorical, mythical, magical, down to very rational, and very much just how a leader moves through edges. So I have this little theory that that would be a powerful pedagogical fearlessness structure. And what we're really just saying is, and you're like me, I don't want to be thrown into something I'm not prepared to go through. My nervous system doesn't like it, generally. I resist. Don't like it. I feel like I'm being pushed. And this is what I think why most people are on this pathological, not their fault. They have a certain pathological basis to their pursuit of freedom. And that includes a lot of political movements. And the reason is because I don't feel they get a chance to dwell on the edge and have not been guided to dwell on the edge from the mainstream. There's always going to be a mainstream. It's about how we negotiate the edges of that. And you can hear, as radicals, if we want to call ourselves that, or even progressives, we have to negotiate that edge with the mainstream. So how are you doing that, right? How are you doing that? How am I doing that? How am I talking about that? How am I writing about it? How am I teaching about that? So anyway, I think work with the edges is an interesting space for dealing with this
That's a
change.
really, I like that model. It reminds me of a lot of things. Before I ever had a chance to test out my theories on children, I had this cat when I was like 20, and I thought, I'm going to make this the most relaxed cat in the world, was my ideation. And my scheme was put him in situations he's not comfortable with and let him calm down at the edges of those situations, right? So we would go for a drive together, and then whenever he would get anxious, we just stop, chill out, you'd pet him and relax him, massage him a little bit, and then we'd start again, right? Or let's put him on the roof, or let's put him in odd places and then allow him to relax at that edge.
Very interesting.
And it seems like it's really important when we're trying to have discussions about how do we quasi radically change the political and socioeconomic and material infrastructure of society in order to keep ourselves alive and thriving in the near future. That's a huge thing. There's so much anxiety. You couldn't just step into the White House and start making those changes, right? That conservative voices often, I think, do a good job of expressing the spirit that would revolt against the changes coming too fast.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we get around too fast? We can't wait 3 generations for the conservatives to get comfortable with it. We have to have ways of accelerating the gaining of that comfort. And to do that, you'd need somebody prominent, somebody with confidence, but also distributed through the system to take people to anxiety edges and, like you're saying,
Yeah,
allow them to uncontract at those edges so
yeah,
that they gain a little bit and so their edge grows.
yeah, yeah. It's like you just can't keep filling up an anxious cup, with more new changes. Um, it will deconstruct and it will regress. That's what the system will do. I mean, you can see this in the mental health, systems. Just as a classic example in mental health, I've had some time in psych wards and so on, watching and so on, and that's what's happening. When somebody goes into catatonic, more or less, really rigid movements, slow down, what locking, following the wall and the handle along the side of the. That's telling you what a nervous system does when it doesn't want new inputs, regardless of all the other diagnoses. It functionally, systemically does not want new inputs until you have to do a lot of prep to get it to have new inputs, even to have reflective thought. A lot of systems are not prepared for reflective thought. That's too challenging to their holding on to the rails. So you can just hear how much compassion is required by our political ideologies. And so that's what we're looking for. In simple terms, we're looking for a compassionate, ideological, affective driven, more feminine political sphere But that may not be the sphere that takes over politics. We may have to live with the politics structures for a long time. And there I come back to that indigenous analogy. They realize that they are not going to be Western white people, generally. And they said, no, we will parallel with you. Let's make agreements, ethical agreements as best we can to parallel our cultures. And that's the ideal for Canada. And Canada is a really interesting model. Now we can start analyzing that. And I think we do. I think we really need to look at that just as much as the feminine support. We need to look at the indigenous worldview. And then again, we're trying to integrate all of those forms. So wonderful conversation with you today, my friend.
Yeah, we want to let you go, so you got plenty of time to get on to your
Yeah.
next thing here. Enjoying talking to you as always, and it might be really interesting for us to come together and have a specifically Canada-focused discussion
Yeah.
and see what we can dig into.
No, there's a lot of room. I'd love that. Thanks
Okay.
again. And
Yeah,
thank you for
great
not
talking with you, Michael.
self-promoting too much. And I think I did a good job. Let's let our critics now. We invite you to critique if we self-promote.
As soon as you're off camera, I'm going to let's sell a book. All right, see you next time, Michael. Thank you very much.